The people versus the president. Anger grows in Belarus against the disputed election of Alexander Lukashenko. So, will these protests topple his 26-year rule? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Protests are rare in Belarus. President Alexander Lukashenko has maintained a tight grip on power since 1994, silencing nearly all forms of dissent. But his controversial re-election last Sunday has triggered a week of unprecedented demonstrations and a tough response from police. The opposition and protesters accuse Lukashenko of rigging the vote. Many demonstrators say they were beaten and tortured during the police crackdown. Opposition leader Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who escaped to Lithuania after losing the election, is calling for more peaceful rallies. Chants for Lukashenko to leave echoed around a square in Minsk, where people held a memorial for a protester who was killed. We'll bring in our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Step Vasen in the Belarusian capital.
What started as a memorial for a 34-year-old car mechanic, Alexander Tikhanovskaya, who was killed here at this square earlier in the week during protest, has now led to one of the largest mass rallies that we've seen in Belarus in the last week. Thousands, probably tens of thousands of people have gathered here in the last couple of hours, not only to pay respect to the victim. There have been people carrying flowers. There's a large mountain of flowers here nearby. People were crying. It was very emotional. But also their anger is coming out. They are calling police criminals. They're asking for Lukashenko to resign immediately. And they say Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is our president. Where this is all going to lead to, nobody knows. In the meantime, Lukashenko has been asking help from President Putin because he needs help. He can't control this situation anymore. It's basically a turning point now for the president. But even the threat of asking help from neighboring Russia is not deterring people here anymore. They are now used to the threats of the president, and they have been suffering beatings, tortures, all kinds of intimidation in the last week. And that old tactic that's been used by Lukashenko for more than 2 decades is not helping any longer. They are determined to stay until new elections are going to be called and the president is going to step down.
Alexander Lukashenko insists he's not stepping down. He's spoken to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, warning the protests are not just a threat to Belarus. The European Union is working on sanctions against officials it says are responsible for violence and falsifying the election result. Neighbouring Poland is considering humanitarian visas for Belarusians, and speaking to Al Jazeera, the foreign minister of another neighbour, Lithuania, urged Lukashenko to listen to the people.
What we are demanding, very simple things: to release those detained, also to stop violence and to start, sounds quite weird, but to start the dialogue with own people, own citizens. They need not much. By the way, they were not aggressive. They were not smashing windows or burning cars. But the force used against them was really extraordinary. And that would remain some traces in the future. That's definitely very difficult. So we have no intention whatsoever or willingness or right to intervene into the domestic affairs of that country. But what we are talking here has no borders and really deserves our attention.
Let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Minsk, Jaroslav Romanchuk, president of the Mises Scientific Research Center think tank. From Kiev, Peter Zalmayev, executive director at the Eurasia Democracy Initiative. And in London, Domitilla Sagramoso, lecturer in security and development at King's College London. A welcome to you all. I'd like to begin in Minsk with you, Jaroslav. Are we right now a week into the beginning of the end of the president?
We are in the beginning of the peaceful revolution for love, dignity, democracy, and freedom. That's unprecedented when not only political activists, civil activists, but hundreds of thousands of workers all around the country joined forces with one just thing. Lukashenko must go. We are sick and tired of him. The brutality, atrocity, and tortures that Belarusian regime exposed and experienced in the last 5 days are unprecedented. With this kind of reputation and deeds, there is no moral, political grounds to stay for Lukashenko in power. So yes, I think that this is the beginning of the end.
Let me bring in Peter Zalmayev from Kiev here. I mean, he is being backed by Putin, somewhat reluctantly, some would say, but there does seem to be a conversation between Lukashenko and the Russian president, and they seem to be talking.
Well, let me just go back on what you asked our Belarus-based colleague who said it's the beginning of the end. I would probably just go with Churchill, who is reported to have said this may not be the beginning of the end, but may be the end of the beginning. And this is precisely why we're seeing these sorts of this sort of consultation that you just asked me between the two presidents. Lukashenko went to Putin. There's no love lost between these two men, so you understand. They have disliked each other forever. They're completely different in their mentality. Putin distrusts Lukashenko, does not like him, and has supported him all these years quite reluctantly as the lesser of all the evils. That calculation may be changing in Vladimir Putin's mind, depending on what is happening in the streets. It is being reported that Lukashenko has asked Putin to step in militarily. He may be asking for Russian tanks on the streets of Minsk and other Belarusian cities because he simply is smelling serious trouble. The main thing we're seeing right now is the nationwide strike that has reportedly is covering about 80% of all the industry of Belarus. And the heavy industry has been traditionally Lukashenko's bastion of support. He's risking losing it. He's already lost it. And he went to Putin. Now, Putin's calculation is very complicated. He does not want to be backing a very unpopular president. He's probably not contemplating introducing troops. Rather, he would support someone who would replace Lukashenko. He has already done that 2 years ago in the revolution of Armenia. And for now, the anti-Lukashenko street is not necessarily anti-Russia. And Putin is very careful to maintain that balance and not to turn the opposition against the Kremlin.
But Jaroslav Romanchuk, is there a potential for Russian tanks to be on the streets of Minsk? Is there any way that you can see that happening? Our guest in Kiev says it's an option, but it might not happen.
Well, in December 2019, Putin offered Lukashenko a deal that would have been quite acceptable for Putin. That would have been very, very good for the Kremlin, because that would mean staying for Putin in power for a long time within the Union state, a new political and geopolitical entity. Lukashenko vehemently refused to accept this offer, saying that no, Belarus would stay independent no matter what. I do not see any reason why Lukashenko should change his mind right now. We have many more tanks right now, many tanks to defend ourselves. And Lukashenko, if he accepted this proposal, he would be the first loser. So I think in all factors, he'd rather support, repress his own people, start to negotiate with workers, even start negotiate with Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who, from our position perspective, won the election landslide. But that would be within our Belarusian national borders, because no matter what, the Belarusian street society, the message is not pro-Europe or against Russia. That's against Lukashenko. And if Russia steps in, Russia would definitely not get welcoming remarks and support from the population. So that would be another hot spot on the map. And taking account the point that about 60% of Russians support Lukashenko, then I do not think that would mean any meaningful advantage to Putin. That he targets Ukraine first. And as long as Ukraine is independent and developing and is not within the orbit of Putin's full control, then he would not attack Belarus.
Let's bring in Domitilla Sagramoso from London here. It's an interesting question, isn't it? What does Russia do next? This is all happening in its neighborhood, in its sphere of influence. What's the Russian thinking here, do you think?
I think that Putin has to really tread this very fine line, because on the one hand, he has to be very careful, and I think that he will think very, very carefully whether he's going to send in troops. I don't think that is his preferred option at all. I agree with what the previous speaker said. I mean, it's certainly going to cause a great uproar, even probably inside Russia as well. And certainly inside Belarus. So he knows that if he sends in even sort of little green men, polite men, that would also be very sort of risky. So he has to find a way through which he can help Lukashenko without interfering directly. In some way, sort of instructing him how to address the crisis, and trying to make sure that Lukashenko does not use excessive amount of force. So maybe sort of, I would envisage two kinds of scenarios that they are maybe planning. One in which they allow for these demonstrations to go ahead and try to negotiate, which seems to be what is being suggested now even by Lukashenko, to speak to the negotiations within factories, and as was mentioned, maybe even with Tikhanovskaya, or a scenario in which, and this slowly leads to a sort of a fall in the support for these demonstrations, or the second scenario where you think that these demonstrations may turn in some way violent, and that can justify then the use of force by the regime. But I think that Russia at the moment is not really thinking about massive intervention unless the situation becomes extremely dangerous or extremely violent, or, I think he's going to try to in some way guide Lukashenko around the way he would like things to pan out.
Jaroslav Romanchuk, Lukashenko has been absolutely clear. He said that there is a foreign hand working in Belarus right now that's supporting the protesters, sowing discord in his own country. Are you a foreign agent?
I've been a foreign agent for all my life. Now I'm working for New Zealand intelligence, Kiwi, I call it. It's a joke, of course. You know that we've been on the streets of Minsk for about 7 days. And it's not about Minsk, that's about regional cities, small cities, even small villages, where special troopers, arrested and attacked ordinary rural population, which is outrageous. And not a single country can afford so many spies. So the thing is that Lukashenko cannot accept this very simple truth. In this campaign, he attacked women. He said the constitution of Belarus is not for women. He ignored workers. He ignored different dialogue platforms for all his long years in power. As a result, when to a coronavirus crisis added to distrust of the government, and what really killed the remnants of popularity and support to Lukashenko, the brutality, tortures in downtown Minsk. Now about 35, 40 persons are missing, allegedly murdered by police and special troops. And would be a lot of investigation around, and the hand of the foreign power that Lukashenko referred to many, many times, most of the time, is the hand of the Kremlin. And ever we see Mr. Sobchak, mouthpiece of Russian propaganda, he was outraged by the way Lukashenko beat people, by the way they did not recognize threats, and they're trying to make this very silly comment that Lukashenko has been acting based on the Western scenario. So I'm sure that Lukashenko in 2010, in 2019, he said that it is Russia, it is Putin, it is all Russian oligarchs who are trying to force Belarus into this union state, offering him the position of a political puppet in this political thing. And if we accept the notion that Putin's agenda is restoration of historical Russia in the borders of the 19th century, then definitely Belarus in the orbit of influence of Russia. But the key centerpiece is no doubt Ukraine.
Let's bring in Peter Zalmayev. Peter, there is another way of thinking about this. If Lukashenko doesn't accept international mediators, international mediation, then it's really just Russia that might be able to bring an end to this. But Russia's very unpopular in Belarus itself. Is this just going to keep the protests going?
Well, I wouldn't say it's unpopular. I like what you see in Ukraine, precisely because Russia has so far not intervened militarily in Belarus. Belarusians are pretty neutral about Russia, and actually they're all united, maybe unfortunately for now, because they're all Russian speakers. There's not that divide between, let's say, Belarusian speakers and Russian speakers the way you have in Ukraine. Ukrainian-speaking West and Russian-speaking industrial East. So, in a sense, it could play to Russia's and Putin's benefit, but at the same time, it's a strength of the opposition, of the people, because it is now shaping up to be a true people's revolution modeled on, I would say, after Poland's solidarity in the early 1980s and Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, precisely why Lukashenko is finding it so difficult to react to it properly, and nothing is working. One after another of population groups, demographic groups, women, you talk about plant workers, you talk about pensioners, small towns, big cities, they're all rising up, and Lukashenko is unable to respond to it properly. In fact, he may be feeling cornered to the point where he would go back to Putin and offer him to take Belarus as part of this long harbored plan for a sort of union between Russia and Belarus. But then you're going to run into the problem of whether the current opposition, which is the people, will accept that. And I have spoken to Belarusians, young and old, and none of them is willing to contemplate that sort of reunion. You know, Russia is fine as a neighbor, as a main economic supporter, but Belarus will remain sovereign. Lukashenko knows that, and Putin knows that. And therefore, I don't think Lukashenko's offer is all that attractive to Putin right now.
Domitilla Sagramoso in London, let's talk about the European Union here. They have come out and they've condemned Lukashenko. They've said that there needs to be a dialogue, but Lukashenko seems to be ignoring them. And this is despite all 27 member states in agreement when it comes to a policy for Belarus. Is the European Union powerless here?
Well, I mean, what I just read before this broadcast, I mean, it seemed as though there was a desire by Belarus to also have some kind of conversation with the European Union that was sort of officially said, which also indicates that, Lukashenko is trying to keep all his options open. And of course, I think that the Europeans have the experience of Ukraine in mind when they are thinking about Belarus. And I think that what they are calculating is they want to, in some way, resolve peacefully this potential transition and find an alternative way out without Lukashenko, but they do not want to be seen as sort of the instigators of the change and then give some kind of justification for a Russian intervention, which is what I think is very much feared. At the same time, the Europeans have so many internal issues that they're addressing at the moment that the focus is not so much on this external crisis, even though they border countries of the European Union. So I think it's more a matter of sort of damage control than sort of full intervention. And if I may just go back to what Russia would like, I think that what Russia would like is in a way to have a leadership of Lukashenko that is quite weakened so that in some way it can push forward with further integration. I think that is clear, as was also mentioned by the previous speakers, that Russia definitely intends to strengthen this sort of union state and probably sees around a weakened Lukashenko an opportunity but at the same time needs to be very careful not to sort of alienate the entire population of Belarus.
Well, let's put that to Jaroslav Romanchuk. Would you accept a weakened Lukashenko?
Lukashenko is a cunning, sophisticated, experienced politician. He's been fooling Putin for 20 years. He signed numerous agreements, integration, you name it, and he has never delivered. Putin knows it. The Kremlin knows it. Everybody knows it. So there is zero confidence and trust in whatever Lukashenko says. So Lukashenko is weakened right now. I can hardly mention any area where there is good cooperation between Belarus and Russia. Even the military cooperation is not as solid as it was like 10, 15 years ago. With geopolitical, social, economic crisis, I see that Russia, without any clear advantage in any scenarios, it would just wait and play the role of surprise, human rights organization, humanitarian organization or humanitarian observer that would be against tortures. Russia would try to win hearts and minds of the people. It would try to give opportunities to Belarusian factories, red directors, nomenclature, even special forces to build up separate. Because you can, in Ukraine, you have some pro-Russian political forces and politicians. In Belarus, there is not a single political force or a politician of influence that is pro-Russian. They don't exist. That's why there's kind of hope that Lukashenko, after rejecting so many dialogue proposals from us, from scientific community, expert community, business community, would finally turn to the dialogue inside the country. Of course, he should do a lot to restore trust. Of course, the agenda right now is how to transfer power to the new president. These are the issues on the table. What we need is a powerful, authoritative intimidator, somebody who would urge Lukashenko to look in the eyes of reality.
We are running out of time, and I do want to ask you another question on the point that you've just made. Actually, Peter, you want to say something? What is it you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say quickly, you know, Putin has several tools at his disposal in his arsenal. And, you know, yes, the picture is not very good for him, because if it's a triumph, the triumph of another color revolution, it's looking pretty bad for Russia, and Putin is afraid of this contagion spreading. But if the push comes to shove, and if the street wins, he will negotiate with the new leader. And what he will really want, the Belarus can remain autonomous up to a point, but the one key demand Putin will put forward is that it does not move closer towards Europe and become a member of the European Union, and that it does not join NATO. That is precisely the policy, and a very bloody policy, unfortunately, that he's been pursuing vis-a-vis Ukraine.
Jaroslav, let's get your reaction. Even if it's not Lukashenko, even if it is the woman waiting in the wings in Lithuania, Tikhanovskaya, will she be strong enough to be able to say to Putin, we're not going to join, we're going to join the European Union, we're going to be part of NATO, or are you replacing one with another?
Tikhanovskaya is another politician. She's kind of a wife of a political prisoner. She ran with just one thing. When I win, she says, then I would declare free and fair presidential elections. And she doesn't have any geopolitical orientation. She's got some good advisors. And I think that the overwhelming support she got is just that we don't want to have Lukashenko as the first and only president. And if we have it, we'll try to pursue the policy of neutrality and to have good relations with all our neighbors, including European Union. Because let me remind you that in the last 4 years, Lukashenko has been trying to lure the West with this so-called Minsk dialogue supported by Germany, and it failed, as we now see.
I just want to thank all our guests, Jaroslav Romanchuk, Peter Zalmayev and Domitilla Sagramoso. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you could also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the entire team here in Doha, bye for now.